In the sun-baked hills of the American West, a chance encounter between a poor cowboy and a mysterious dying cowgirl unfolds into something extraordinary. Her weathered face holds secrets as deep as the canyons themselves when she begs him to accompany her to a hidden cabin, one she's kept secret her entire life. Behind its worn wooden doors lies a fortune that could change everything. Gold coins, carefully preserved deeds, and journals telling a tale of lost inheritance and forgotten legacy. With her final breath, she entrusts him with not just a key, but a choice that will echo through generations. The wealth could be his alone, but what he decides to do with it transforms an entire valley forever. What compelled this lone cowgirl to keep such a fortune hidden for so long, only to give it away to a stranger? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake Morrison's weathered boots kicked up dust along the cattle trail as the morning sun painted the Montana sky in shades of amber and rose. His worn saddlebag, patched more times than he could count, held everything he owned in this world. 2 shirts, a spare pair of socks, his mother's dog-eared Bible, and exactly $37.15. At 35, Jake had the kind of face that told stories without speaking. Laugh lines around his eyes from finding joy in simple things. Worry creases across his forehead from years of hard living, and a gentle set to his mouth that spoke of kindness preserved despite life's hardships. His dark hair, streaked with early gray at the temples, peeked out beneath a sweat-stained Stetson that had seen better days. The ranch hands at the Double R spread had offered him another month's work, but Jake knew it was time to move on. He'd seen that look in the owner's daughter's eyes, the one that spoke of settling down, of white picket fences and Sunday dinners. It wasn't that he was against such things, he just couldn't offer them, not with empty pockets and a restless spirit. His horse, an aging bay mare named Sugar, plodded along with the steady reliability that had made her his only constant companion for the past 8 years. She'd been a wild thing when he'd found her, half-starved and nursing a wounded leg. Now she moved with the easy grace of an animal that knew she was loved, even if her owner couldn't afford fancy feed or proper stabling. "Just you and me again." "Old girl," Jake murmured, patting Sugar's neck. The mare's ear flicked back at his voice, a gesture so familiar it almost hurt. Sometimes he wondered if he was doing right by her, this wandering life, but she seemed content enough with their arrangement. The morning wore on as they made their way toward Willow Creek, where Jake had heard they might need help with the spring roundup. He wasn't the fastest worker, nor the strongest, but he had a reputation that preceded him: honest, reliable, good with troubled horses, and willing to work for fair wages without complaint. As they crested a hill, Jake spotted smoke rising from a small homestead in the valley below. The thin, grey stream spoke of a cooking fire, and his stomach reminded him it had been hours since his meager breakfast. He wouldn't ask for food. Pride wouldn't allow it, but sometimes folks offered work in exchange for a meal, and his supplies were running low. The well-maintained fence line and the neat stack of firewood suggested the kind of people who believed in doing things right. Jake appreciated that. He'd worked enough places to know the difference between folks who cared about their land and those who just wanted to wring profit from it. He was about to turn Sugar toward the homestead when a sound caught his attention. The distant bawling of a calf in distress. Jake tilted his head, listening. Most would have ignored it, figured it was someone else's problem. But that wasn't his way. "Reckon breakfast can wait, Sugar," he said, turning his mare toward the sound. "Might be someone needs a hand." The calf's cries led them to a steep-sided gully where the young animal had become trapped, its leg caught between 2 rocks. It would have been easier to ride on, to tell himself it wasn't his concern. But Jake had learned long ago that the measure of a man wasn't in what he did when people were watching, but in the choices he made when no one would ever know. It took the better part of an hour to get the calf free and find its mother, who had been pacing anxiously nearby. No one would pay him for this work, and his stomach was grumbling something fierce, but the sight of the pair reunited was worth more than any wages. As Jake remounted Sugar, his joints protesting the morning's unexpected exercise, he caught sight of something unusual in the distance. A cloud of dust that seemed out of place, too low for weather, too scattered for a rider. Something about it nagged at him, tugged at instincts honed by years on the trail. "What do you say, Sugar?" he asked, though he already knew they'd investigate. "Should we take a look?" The mare's answering snort seemed to say she knew as well. As he did that, they'd never been good at minding their own business when someone might need help. And so they turned away from the homestead and their hoped-for breakfast, heading instead toward whatever mystery awaited them in the shimmering heat of the morning. The dust cloud led Jake to a gathering of buzzards, their dark shapes wheeling against the late morning sky, his mouth set in a grim line as Sugar picked her way down the rocky slope. In his experience, nothing good ever came from circling buzzards, but something wouldn't let him turn away. The birds scattered as he approached, revealing a crumpled form near a sparse creek bed. Jake's heart caught in his throat, not an animal as he'd half expected, but a person. He dismounted before Sugar fully stopped, boots hitting the ground hard as he rushed forward. She was alive, barely. An elderly woman in men's riding clothes, her silver hair escaping from a long braid. A strange silver pendant gleamed at her throat, its surface etched with markings he'd never seen before. Her weathered face was pale beneath its tan, but her eyes, when they fluttered open at his approach, were sharp as hawk talons. "Took you long enough," she whispered, and somehow managed to smile. "Ma'am," Jake said, already shrugging out of his jacket to wrap around her shoulders. "I'm going to ride for help." Her hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping his wrist. "No time." Her voice was like wind through dry grass. "Listen carefully, boy. I'm Sarah Blackwood, and I've been waiting for someone like you." Jake frowned, checking her for injuries. Besides exhaustion and exposure, he couldn't find anything obviously wrong. "Ma'am, Miss Blackwood, you need a doctor." "What I need," she said with sudden steel in her voice, "is someone with a good heart and strong hands. Someone who'd help a trapped calf without being asked." Jake's head snapped up. "You saw that? Been watching you since sunrise." She coughed, and Jake supported her head, helping her sip from his canteen. "Needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" "That you were the right one." Her fingers worked at the silver pendant around her neck. "Help me up. There's something I need to show you, and not much time left to show it. You can barely stand, then you'll have to help me ride." There was no arguing with the determination in her voice. "My horse is hidden in those rocks yonder. Good animal, but she knows better than to stand around waiting for the buzzards." Against his better judgment, Jake found himself helping her to her feet. She was light in his arms, bird-boned but wiry strong. The pendant swung free as she stood, catching the sunlight. Up close, he could see the markings were a map of some kind, though like none he'd ever seen. "Miss Blackwood." "Sarah," she corrected, leaning heavily against him. "We're past formalities, Jake Morrison." "How do you know my name?" "Asked about you at the Double R last week. They said you were honest, hard-working, and too stubborn to take charity." She smiled again, though it clearly cost her. That last part's important. As they made their way to the rocks where her horse waited, Sarah's breathing grew labored, but she waved off his concerns. Her horse, a sturdy black mare, emerged from the shadows at her whistle. The animal was well cared for, its tack expensive, but well worn. "There's a place," Sarah said as Jake helped her mount, "up in those hills. Been in my family for generations, though you won't find it on any map. I need you to help me get there. The doctor in town is 3 hours' ride in the wrong direction." She settled in her saddle, gathering her strength. "What I need to show you can't wait that long. Sometimes, Jake Morrison, a body just knows when their time is coming. Will you help me?" Jake looked up at this strange woman who spoke with such certainty, who had watched him all morning and judged him worthy of something. Common sense said to ignore her wishes and ride for help, but there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of urgency and importance beyond his understanding. "Yes, ma'am," he heard himself say. "I'll help you." "Good." She pointed toward a barely visible trail leading up into the hills. "Then let's not waste any more time. There's a story you need to hear, and I aim to tell it to you properly, in the place where it all began." As they started up the trail, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was riding into something bigger than himself, something that would change everything. The silver pendant caught the light again, its mysterious map seeming to whisper of secrets waiting to be discovered. The trail wound higher into the hills, following paths Jake would have missed if Sarah hadn't pointed them out. Every so often, she'd direct his attention to seemingly random markers. A notched rock here, a bent tree there, each one meaningful in ways only she understood. Despite her weakening condition, her eyes remained sharp, reading the landscape like a book written in a language only she knew. "Your horse," Sarah said, nodding toward Sugar. "She favors her left hind leg. Old injury?" Jake nodded, surprised. She'd noticed. "Found her caught in barbed wire years back, healed clean, but she'll always have that slight hitch. Yet you kept her. It wasn't a question. Wasn't her fault she got hurt. Besides, she's got heart." Sarah's smile was knowing. "Some might say that makes her less valuable. Some don't know the worth of loyalty," Jake replied, then caught the way Sarah was studying him. "You're testing me again, aren't you?" "Always." She coughed, a dry, rattling sound that worried Jake more with each passing hour. "Turn here. See that lightning-struck pine? Remember it. Important marker." The old trail map she'd pulled from her saddlebag was weathered and cryptic, marked with symbols that matched the ones on her pendant. Jake noticed how her hands trembled as she traced their route, though her voice remained steady. "My grandfather drew this map," she explained, "added to it all his life, just as his father did before him. The real directions, though," she tapped her temple, "those are up here. Been walking these trails since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Why show me now? Because everyone's got to pass on what they know sometime." Another coughing fit seized her, "And I've waited long enough to find the right person." They paused at a small spring, hidden beneath an overhang. While the horses drank, Jake helped Sarah dismount, pretending not to notice how she leaned more heavily against him than before. She insisted on sitting on a sun-warmed rock rather than resting properly. "Girl like me wasn't supposed to inherit anything," she said, her voice distant with memory. "That's what the lawyers said when my grandfather died. Had it all planned out. Distant cousins who'd never worked a day on this land, swooping in to claim what was rightfully mine. What did you do? What any Blackwood would do. I disappeared." Her eyes sparkled with old mischief. "Took what was mine and vanished into these hills. Been watching over things my way ever since." Jake offered her water from his canteen, noting, with concern, how her hands shook. "Must have been lonely. Lonely's better than watching strangers destroy everything your family built." She gestured at the sprawling landscape below them. "This land, it's got secrets, sacred places, old promises. Can't trust just anyone with that." As they mounted up again, Sarah's breath came in short gasps, but she waved off Jake's concern. "Not far now. See that split rock up there? Looks like a crow's beak. Head toward it, but watch for the marker I showed you, the one with the crossed lines. Miss that turn, and you'll waste half a day getting back on track." Jake found himself memorizing every detail, though he wasn't sure why. The way the afternoon light hit certain rocks, the pattern of the crosses Sarah pointed out, the specific bend of trees that marked their path. Something told him these details mattered, would matter more than he could understand right now. "Your parents," Sarah said suddenly. "They passed young, didn't they?" Jake started. "How did you—" "The Bible in your saddlebag. Way you handle it, all careful-like. That's not just religion. That's memory. Fever took them both when I was 12. Uncle raised me after, but it wasn't the same." Sarah nodded, as if he'd confirmed something important. "Loss teaches you things. Makes you understand the weight of what's passed down." She pointed to a narrow gap between two cliffs. "Through there, and Jake, What you're about to see, it's not just about money or property. It's about legacy, about doing right by those who came before and those who'll come after. As they guided their horses through the gap, Jake felt the weight of Sarah's words settle around his shoulders like a mantle. Whatever waited ahead, he understood now that she wasn't just showing him a hidden place. She was entrusting him with something precious, something that had shaped her entire life. The sun was dipping toward the horizon, painting the cliffs in shades of gold and purple as Sarah pointed to a hidden valley ahead. "Almost there," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Almost home." The hidden valley opened before them like a secret garden, sheltered on all sides by towering cliffs. Late afternoon sunlight spilled over the western ridge, illuminating a paradise that time seemed to have forgotten. A creek meandered through stands of aspens, their leaves shimmering silver-green in the breeze. Wild roses and sage painted the valley floor in splashes of pink and grey. Sarah pulled an old brass spyglass from her saddlebag, its surface worn smooth by generations of hands. "Here," she said, passing it to Jake. "Look there, by that lightning-struck oak. See the stones?" Through the spyglass, Jake could make out what looked like an ancient circle of standing stones half buried in the earth. "Indian markers?" "Older." Sarah's voice carried a weight of knowledge. "My great-grandfather found them when he first came to this valley. Said they spoke to him in dreams, told him this was a sacred place, a place of power." She coughed, then continued. "Folks thought he was crazy, of course, but he knew what he had found." As they rode deeper into the valley, Sarah pointed out more landmarks with her failing strength. A cave mouth that had sheltered 3 generations of blackwoods during winter storms. A hot spring that never froze, even in the coldest months. Each location came with a story, a memory, a piece of history that Sarah seemed desperate to pass on. "Used to watch this valley through that spyglass for hours when I was young," she said. "Grandfather taught me every shadow, every change of season. Said knowing the land was more important than any book learning." She smiled at a distant memory. "Course, he made sure I had plenty of that too, had a whole library up at the cabin." Jake helped her down from her horse near a clear pool, insisting she rest. Her skin had taken on an ashen cast that worried him, but her eyes remained bright with purpose. "Taught myself to read with my mother's old medical books," Jake offered, trying to distract her from her obvious pain. "Uncle always said I had more education than sense." Sarah's laugh turned into another coughing fit. "Books are good, but it's what's in your heart that matters. Like that calf this morning. You didn't need book learning to know what was right." She drew the spyglass again, but this time turned it toward the cliff face ahead of them. "See that ledge up there? One that looks like a sleeping bear." When Jake nodded, she continued, "Behind it is a cave system that runs clear through the mountain. Used it during Prohibition, so the story goes. Grandfather had selective views about government oversight. Despite her weakening condition, Sarah insisted on showing Jake a hidden grotto where the creek disappeared underground. "Water table feeds 7 counties from here," she explained. "Another reason to keep this place protected. Wrong people get hold of this land, they could control water rights for half the territory." The sun was starting to set when Sarah finally pointed to a barely visible trail leading up to a natural shelf in the cliff face. "There," she whispered. "Home." Jake had to squint to see it. A cabin built so naturally into the rock face that it seemed to have grown there. The weathered wood had taken on the exact color of the surrounding stone, making it nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "Grandfather built it," Sarah said proudly. "Took him 3 years, working, mostly at night so the smoke wouldn't show. Said if you're going to hide something precious, you do it proper or not at all." As they approached the cabin, Sarah's breathing became more labored, but she refused to stop. "Need to show you inside," she gasped. "Papers. You need to see. Things you need to understand." Jake helped her down from her horse one last time, supporting most of her weight as they made their way to the cabin's door. She fumbled with an iron key that hung on a chain beneath her shirt, separate from the pendant. "Jake Morrison," she said, her voice suddenly clear and strong despite her weakness. What you're about to see hasn't been shown to another living soul in 40 years. Are you ready for that responsibility? Looking into her fierce eyes, Jake understood that this was his last chance to walk away. But something in him, the same something that had made him help that calf, that had kept him honest through hard, and times knew he couldn't. "Yes, Mom," he said. "I'm ready." Sarah nodded once, satisfied, and turned the key in the lock. The door opened with a whisper of well-oiled hinges, revealing darkness beyond. The cabin's interior emerged from shadow as Sarah lit an old oil lamp, its warm glow revealing a space that felt frozen in time. Every surface told a story of careful preservation, hand-hewn furniture worn smooth by decades of use, quilts faded, to subtle harmonies of color, walls lined with books whose leather bindings spoke of constant care despite their age. Sarah's fingers trembled as she removed a ring of iron keys from a hook by the door. "Each one opened something different," she explained, her voice growing weaker. "Grandfather believed in compartments, said a man who puts all his treasures in one box is asking to lose everything at once." Jake helped her to a rocking chair near the stone fireplace, noting how her breathing had become more labored. She waved off his concern, pointing instead to a heavy oak cabinet in the corner. "Third key from the left, brass one with the notched head." The cabinet's doors opened silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing shelves of leather-bound ledgers and metal boxes. "Start with the red book," Sarah directed. "One with the gold stamp." Jake brought it to her, watching as she opened it with reverent care. Inside, the pages were filled with precise handwriting and carefully preserved documents. "Property deeds," she explained, "every piece of land the Blackwoods ever owned, some going back to territorial days." She turned pages with shaking hands, showing him maps marked with boundaries that didn't match any modern survey. "People think the valuable part is the gold, and yes, there's plenty of that. But the real wealth, it's in the water rights, the mineral claims, the forgotten agreements that never made it into county records." Her cough grew worse, and Jake insisted on building a fire, despite her protests that there wasn't time. As he worked, she continued talking, her voice growing more urgent. "Second key from the right, the iron one with the curved shaft, cabinet under the window seat." This cabinet proved to be a false front, swinging away to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside, canvas bags sat in neat rows, their contents clinking softly as Jake lifted them out at Sarah's direction. "Gold dust and nuggets," she explained. "Grandfather didn't trust banks, said paper money was a fool's game. Been adding to his collection all my life, selling off small amounts when needed, careful never to draw attention." But it was the drawer. Beneath the gold that made Jake's breath catch, stacks of papers, yes, but also photographs, dozens of them, spanning decades. He saw a younger Sarah on horseback, a proud man who must have been her grandfather. Faces that told the story of a family's legacy. "That's the real treasure," Sarah said softly. "The proof of who we were, who we are." Another coughing fit seized her, worse than before. When she could speak again, her voice was barely a whisper. "One more key. Silver one with the square head. Strong box under the floorboards. Beneath that bearskin rug." Jake moved the rug, finding a trapdoor so well crafted it was nearly invisible. The strong box inside was small but heavy, its surface etched with the same strange markings as Sarah's. "Pendant, my grandmother's jewelry box," Sarah explained, as Jake set it beside her chair. "But she kept more than jewels in it." Her fingers traced the intricate patterns as she spoke. "Letters, legal papers, the truth about why we had to hide." She tried to insert the key, but her hands were shaking too badly. Jake steadied them with his own, helping her turn the lock. Inside, nestled among velvet pouches of gleaming jewelry, lay a stack of yellowed envelopes and a leather-bound journal. "You need to understand," Sarah said, her voice growing more urgent as her strength failed. "Why I chose you. Why it had to be someone like you." She pressed the journal into his hands. "Read it. Start at the beginning." But first, her fingers clutched his arm with surprising strength. First, you need to know about the curse. Jake looked up sharply. Curse? Sarah's eyes were fever bright now. Not the supernatural kind. The kind that comes with old money and old secrets. The kind that destroyed my family once before. She drew a ragged breath. And the kind that's about to catch up with us again, if we don't hurry. Outside, the sun had set completely, leaving them in the lamp's golden glow. As Jake helped Sarah take a sip of water, he could feel time slipping away like sand through an hourglass. Whatever secrets this cabin held, whatever story Sarah needed to tell, he knew they were running out of time to hear it. Sarah insisted on moving to the old oak table, where she opened the family Bible with trembling hands. Its pages were filled with careful annotations, birth dates, death dates, and marriages stretching back generations. But it was what lay pressed between those pages that caught Jake's attention. Newspaper clippings, letters, and what looked like court documents. The Blackwood fortune, Sarah began, her voice steadying as she told the tale, didn't come from gold, not really. My great-grandfather, Thomas Blackwood, he was what folks called a water witch, had a gift for finding underground springs. Back in 1868, he started buying up what everyone thought was worthless land. She smiled faintly. Only he knew what lay beneath. She pulled out a yellowed map, its creases worn soft with age. Every piece of property he bought had something in common. Water, underground rivers, natural springs, aquifers that fed half the territory. By the time anyone realized what he'd done, the Blackwoods controlled more water rights than any other. Family in the state, Jake studied the map, seeing the familiar landscape transformed by the blue lines marking hidden waterways. That's why the cabin's here. It's the heart of it all. Smart boy. Sarah's approval was warm, though her breath came in shorter gasps now. But water wasn't enough for the next generation. My grandfather, he discovered gold in these hills. Not much, but steady. Enough to build an empire if a body was patient. Her fingers traced the family tree in the Bible. That's when the trouble started. She pulled out a stack of letters, their paper brittle with age. My father had 2 brothers. Both of them wanted control of the family holdings. Started making deals with mining companies, railroad men, anyone who'd help them take what my grandfather had built. Her voice hardened. They didn't care about the land, about the promises made to the people who lived here. Just wanted to strip it bare and sell it off. Jake watched as she unfolded a court document, its official seals faded but still visible. Grandfather knew what would happen if they got control. He'd seen other families tear themselves apart over less. So he did something radical. He left everything to me, his only granddaughter. Not just the gold or the land, but the responsibility, the duty to protect it all. She coughed, and Jake helped her sip some water before she continued. My uncles contested the will, of course, brought in fancy lawyers from back east, said a woman couldn't manage such holdings, that it wasn't natural or right. A fierce pride lit her face. That's when I disappeared. Took every important document, every deed, every proof of ownership, vanished into these hills where nobody could find me. You've been hiding here ever since? Not hiding, watching, protecting. Sarah pulled out a more recent document, dated just a few years back. My uncles died waiting for me to surface. But their children, their grandchildren, they're still out there. Still searching. Every few years, someone comes sniffing around, thinking they can claim what's rightfully mine. She gripped Jake's arm with surprising strength. That's why it had to be you, someone with no connections to the past, no ties to the old families, someone who understands the value of things that can't be measured in dollars and cents. From the Bible's pages, she withdrew one final document, her own will, the ink still fresh. I've watched you, Jake Morrison, seen how you treat those with nothing to offer you, how you handle animals, how you respect the land. You're what my grandfather would call good people. Her voice grew more urgent. The fortune isn't just money, it's responsibility. These waters feed thousands of farms, ranches, whole communities. The wrong hands get hold of these rights. They could destroy everything. Drive out the small ranchers, sell to the highest bidder. She pressed the will into his hands. I'm giving you a choice, but also a burden. The question is, are you strong enough to carry it? Jake looked down at the document, then back at Sarah's intense gaze. Why tell me all this now? Because, she whispered, her voice suddenly fragile, I can feel time running out. And because there's one more secret, the biggest one of all, that you need to know before it's too late. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the cabin's windows like restless spirits. As Sarah gathered her strength for what was to come, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the real test of his character was just beginning. Sarah's hand trembled as she drew out her final piece of evidence, a handwritten will, different from the legal document she'd shown earlier. This, she whispered, is the true testament. Not just instructions, but a story. One that needs to be finished tonight. Jake built up the fire as Sarah's coughs grew worse, then helped her settle closer to its warmth. The lamplight caught the silver in her hair, making it glow like a fading halo. Despite her failing strength, her voice remained clear, determined to share every crucial detail. My grandfather used to say that wealth was like water. Let it flow too freely. It washes away everything in its path. Dam it up completely, it grows stagnant. She pressed the will into Jake's hands. The secret isn't in keeping it or spending it. It's in knowing how to let it flow just right, nourishing everything it touches. She gestured toward a small wooden box on the mantel. Bring that here. Inside was a collection of worn photographs, their edges softened by years of handling. These are the people who depend on these waters. Families who've worked this land for generations. Good people who'd be crushed if the wrong hands got hold of these rights. Jake studied the faces. Weathered ranchers, young families, children, playing in green fields that existed only because of the hidden springs the Blackwoods protected. You've been watching over them all this time? Everyone. Sarah's smile was tired but proud. Their children's children are out there now, though they don't know who's been protecting their way of life. Another coughing fit seized her, worse than before. When she could speak again, her voice was fainter, but someone's coming who could destroy it all. Jake helped her sip some water. Your family? Worse. Man named Harrison Drake, corporate lawyer from Chicago. Her expression hardened. He's been tracking down every living Blackwood descendant, buying up their potential claims, building a case to seize it all. She gripped Jake's arm with surprising strength. That's why it had to be tonight, why I had to find someone I could trust. Once I'm gone, Drake will swoop in like a vulture, unless what? Unless everything's already legally transferred. Unless someone with no connection to the Blackwoods is already in possession, with all the proper paperwork filed. She patted the will. It's all in there. Every detail, every instruction. How to protect the land, manage the rights, keep the waters flowing free. Her breath came in shorter gasps now, but she refused to rest. One last thing. She pulled her silver pendant over her head with shaking hands. This isn't just jewelry, it's a key. Back of the cabin there's a root cellar. Inside you'll find everything else you need to know. But wait until after. Promise me. I promise, Jake said softly, closing his hand around the pendant. Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I never married, never had children. Used to think that was the price of protecting all this. But watching you today, she smiled, though it clearly cost her effort. Maybe I was just waiting for the right air. Her voice grew weaker, but her words more urgent. The water rights. They're not just papers. They're life itself out here. Drake and his kind. They'd sell them to the highest bidder, drain the aquifers dry, turn this valley into a desert. She gripped his hand. Promise me, Jake Morrison. Promise me you'll protect them. All of them. I promise, Jake said again, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Sarah's smile was peaceful now. I knew I chose right, knew from the moment I saw you help that calf. Some men, they do right only when people are watching. But you do right because that's who you are. Her breathing grew more labored, but her eyes remained clear. There's a letter, in the Bible, explains everything to the lawyers. And Jake, she squeezed his hand one last time. Thank you for making an old woman's last day matter. Sarah Blackwood died as she had lived, on her own terms, in the cabin she had protected for so long, with her legacy secured in hands. She trusted. As Jake gently closed her eyes, the wind outside settled into a soft whisper, as if the very land was bidding her farewell. The pendant lay warm in his hand, its encoded map catching the firelight. Whatever secrets the root cellar held would have to wait, for now there was a vigil to keep and promises to honor. Dawn crept into the cabin, finding Jake where he'd kept his vigil through the night. He'd covered Sarah with her favorite quilt, its pattern of interlocking stars, somehow fitting for a woman who'd navigated her life by such distant points of reference. Now, with the first light painting the eastern sky, he faced the weight of decisions that couldn't wait. The collection of deeds lay spread before him on the oak table, each one representing a piece of Sarah's carefully protected legacy. Water, rights to 3 major aquifers, mineral claims dating back to territorial days, grazing permits that covered thousands of acres. The sheer scope of it was staggering. What would you do first? He asked the quiet room, almost hearing Sarah's practical voice in response. The answer came as he remembered her words about the root cellar. Some mysteries needed solving before the outside world came knocking. The pendant key felt warm in his palm as he made his way to the back of the cabin. The root cellar's entrance was craftily disguised beneath what looked like a solid wooden platform. Only the smallest of seams betrayed its existence. The pendant fit perfectly into a hidden lock, turning with a smooth click that spoke of regular maintenance. The space below was dry and cool, lined with shelves of preserved foods and supplies. But it was the back wall that drew Jake's attention. A large safe, built right into the stone foundation, bore the same intricate markings as the pendant. Inside he found more than gold and papers. There were detailed letters, carefully organized, by date, describing every aspect of managing the Blackwood holdings. Sarah had documented everything: which judges could be trusted, which bankers kept quiet books, which ranchers needed help during dry years. It was a manual for preserving not just wealth, but an entire way of life. One document stood out, a thick folder labeled Drake Industries. Sarah's neat handwriting filled page after page with observations, newspaper clippings, and court records. Harrison Drake had been busy for years, quietly buying up land around the Blackwood properties, pressuring small ranchers to sell, diverting water from natural courses to serve his corporate interests. "So that's what you were protecting us from," Jake murmured, seeing the pattern emerge. Drake wasn't just after Sarah's fortune, he was trying to control every drop of water in 3 counties. With the Blackwood rights, he could dam the rivers, drain the aquifers, force every small ranch and farm to pay whatever price he set for water. Jake's hands shook as he read Sarah's final letter, dated just a week ago. "To whoever I choose to. Carry this burden. I've watched Drake's kind before. They see only numbers on paper, not the lives that depend on these waters. They don't understand that some things aren't meant to be owned, only protected. The legal papers are clear, but the true inheritance is this knowledge. Every spring on this land feeds someone's hopes. Every stream waters someone's dreams. Guard them well. Choose carefully who to trust. Judge slowly, forgive rarely, but when you find good people in need, help freely. That's the real secret of the Blackwood fortune. It's not about keeping wealth, but knowing how to let it flow where it's needed most." A sound from above made Jake freeze, horses approaching the cabin. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, but the world was already closing in. He had to decide now, take the gold and disappear, or stand his ground and fight for Sarah's legacy. The answer came as he looked at a final photograph from the safe. Sarah, as a young woman, fierce and proud beside her grandfather, both of them, standing before this very cabin. On the back in faded ink, "Remember who you guard it for." Jake gathered the essential documents, securing them in Sarah's old saddlebag. The gold could wait. It was the water rights that mattered most right now. He needed to reach the county seat before Drake's lawyers could contest the will, needed to set Sarah's plans in motion while there was still time. But first, he had to lay her to rest properly, had to honor the woman who'd entrusted him with, not just a fortune, but a sacred duty. The approaching riders could wait a few more minutes. Some things were more important than legal papers and contested claims. "I understand now," he whispered to the quiet room. It was never about the money. It was about the responsibility. He straightened his shoulders, feeling the weight of Sarah's legacy settle around him like a well-worn coat. Whatever came next, he would face it standing tall, guided by the principles of the remarkable woman who'd chosen him as her heir. The morning sun had barely touched Main Street when Jake rode into Willow Creek, Sarah's crucial documents secured in his saddlebag. He'd buried her at dawn in a spot she'd chosen years ago, marked in her journal with the same precise care she'd given to everything else. The approaching riders had turned out to be local ranchers, men who'd known Sarah from a distance and came to pay their respects after seeing the cabin smoke. The bank's heavy ledger would soon record the largest transaction in the town's history. But first, Jake had to convince Herbert Mills, the ancient banker, that everything was legitimate. The old man peered at him over wire-rimmed spectacles, examining Sarah's letter and the legal papers with painstaking slowness. "Sarah Blackwood," Mills murmured, recognition flickering in his faded blue eyes. "Haven't heard that name spoken aloud in 40 years." He looked up sharply. "She chose you, did she?" "Yes, sir, last night." Mills nodded slowly, touching Sarah's signature with gentle fingers. "I knew her grandfather, man of principle. Seems she was the same." He studied Jake's face. "She wouldn't have chosen wrong, not about this." The banker pulled out a thick folder, its edges worn smooth with age. "Been keeping these records separate all these years. Water rights payments, mineral lease revenues, grazing fees, all carefully managed, just as she instructed." He smiled faintly. "Folk thought I was fool, keeping books for a ghost." As Mills worked, the town began stirring to life outside. Jake caught fragments of conversation through the bank's windows, whispers about Sarah, about the fortune, about the stranger she'd chosen as her heir. News traveled fast in small towns. "There's something else you should know," Mills said, his voice dropping. "Man name of Drake was here last week, asking questions about the Blackwood properties, about unclaimed inheritances." He shook his head. "Didn't like the look of him, too smooth by half." "He's been buying up claims," Jake confirmed, sharing what he'd learned from Sarah's files, aiming to control all the water rights in 3 counties. "Figured as much." Mills finished his entries with a flourish. "That's why we need to move fast. These papers..." He tapped the documents Jake had brought. "They're all in order, but Drake's got money enough to tie everything up in court for years." The banker pulled out a fresh ledger, its leather binding still stiff. "Sarah knew that. Look here." He opened it to reveal pages of careful instructions, written in Sarah's hand. "She's been preparing for this day for decades. Every detail, every legal precedent, every judge we can trust." Jake studied the entries with growing amazement. Sarah hadn't just left him wealth, she'd left him a blueprint for protecting it. Names of allies, warnings about enemies, even contingency. Plans for various challenges that might arise. The bank's front door chimed, and Jake tensed, but it was only Martha Chen, whose family ran the general store. Her eyes widened when she saw Jake, recognition flooding her face. "You're him, aren't you?" she asked. "The one Miss Sarah chose." At Jake's nod, she continued, "My grandfather used to tell stories about her, said she helped him keep the store. During the Depression, though he never knew where the money came from, more townspeople began filtering in, each with a story. The veterinarian whose education had been mysteriously funded, the widow who'd kept her ranch thanks to an anonymous loan, the young couple who'd received a wedding gift of prime grazing land, signed over by a lawyer who never revealed his client." Mills smiled at Jake's amazement. "Sarah watched over this town for 40 years. Now they'll watch over you." He finished the last entry and closed the ledger with satisfaction. Everything's legal and proper. You're officially the heir to the Blackwood holdings. And just in time, Martha added, glancing out the window. A sleek black car was pulling up outside, its Chicago plates dusty from long travel. That'll be Drake's lawyers. They've been asking questions all week, trying to find out if Sarah had surfaced. Jake stood, gathering the documents with calm deliberation. Sarah's voice seemed to whisper in his mind. Judge slowly, forgive rarely, but help freely. He squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever came through that door. Miss Sarah chose. Well, Martha said softly, and the others nodded in agreement. In their eyes, Jake saw not just acceptance, but hope, the same hope Sarah had protected all these years. The bank's door chimed again, and the real fight for Sarah's legacy began. The architectural plans spread across Sarah's old oak table there, crisp blue lines contrasting with the cabin's weathered wood. 2 weeks had passed since Drake's lawyers had stormed into the bank, and Jake had spent every moment since then bringing Sarah's final vision to life. It's ambitious, said Thomas Chen, Martha's son and the town's only architect. He traced the drawings with careful fingers, his expression thoughtful. A working ranch that's also a water conservation center. Haven't seen anything like it. Jake nodded, pulling out Sarah's journal. She had it all planned. See here. Natural irrigation. Systems, sustainable grazing patterns, educational programs for local farmers. He smiled faintly. She didn't just want to protect the water rights. She wanted to teach others how to protect them too. The plans showed a remarkable blend of old and new. The historic cabin would remain as a museum, telling the Blackwood story. New buildings would rise nearby, a research center, housing for staff, training facilities for sustainable ranching practices. But the heart of it all would be the land itself, preserved and protected just as Sarah had kept it. Drake's people won't like this, Thomas warned, though his eyes shone with excitement. They were counting on you being some fortune hunter who'd sell out quick. He gestured at the plans. This makes the land more valuable as a whole than split up and sold off. That's the point. Jake pulled out another document, the hiring roster he'd been working on. Every person we employ, every family that benefits, makes it harder for them to tear it apart. The list was growing daily. Ranch hands who knew the old ways of working with the land, scientists to study the aquifers and develop conservation methods, teachers to share the knowledge with the next generation. Even old Jimmy Gates, who'd been squatting on the edge of Blackwood land for 20 years, had a place. Sarah's notes had marked him as best tracker in 3 counties. Trust his judgment. Martha arrived with lunch, bringing news from town. Drake's people are offering to buy out water rights all over the valley. Some folks are tempted, but most are waiting to see what you'll do. Jake showed her the section of the plans dealing with water access. We'll honor every agreement Sarah had in place, formal or informal. Add some new ones too. Fair prices, guaranteed access. Make it official, legal and public. Harder for Drake to challenge. Smart? Thomas nodded. Like Sarah, thinking 3 steps ahead. They worked through the afternoon, refining details. Jake insisted on local suppliers for the construction, local workers for the build. Every dollar spent would flow back into the community, just as Sarah had managed her fortune all those years. As the sun began to set, more visitors arrived. Ranchers, farmers, townspeople who'd heard about the plans. Jake watched them pour over. The drawings, seeing hope kindle in their eyes. This wasn't just about preserving Sarah's legacy anymore. It was about building something new from the foundation she'd laid. We'll need to start with the water management systems, Thomas said, marking sections on the plans. Prove we can handle the resources better than any corporation. Already arranged, Jake replied, pulling out permits approved by Herbert Mills. Sarah had water engineers survey the entire property years ago, left complete plans for sustainable management. He smiled. She really did think of everything. Martha studied the employment projections. This would change everything. Give young Folks a reason to stay, bring in new families. She looked at Jake. Is it really possible? Jake touched the silver pendant he still wore, no longer just a key, but a reminder of the promise he'd made. Sarah spent 40 years protecting this land so it could serve a greater purpose. Now, it's time to fulfill that purpose. As twilight settled over the valley, Jake stepped onto the cabin's porch. From here, he could see the spot where he'd first found Sarah, where this journey had begun. The land stretched out before him, rich with potential, waiting to become what she had always known it could be. A wire from Drake's lawyers lay unopened on the table inside. Probably another offer to buy, another attempt to derail what was building here. But Jake knew, with a certainty that grew stronger each day, that Sarah had chosen right. This wasn't just about preserving the past anymore. It was about building a future worthy of the trust she'd placed in him. We're ready to start whenever. You are, Thomas said from the doorway. Jake nodded, turning back to the warmth of the cabin and the work ahead. Then let's begin. The threatening letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered not by mail, but slipped under the cabin door, sometime in the night. Jake found it while making his morning rounds, the heavy, cream-colored envelope standing out against the worn floorboards. Inside, expensive letterhead carried a message that was both polite and poisonous. Dear Mr. Morrison, it read, our client, Drake Industries, has serious concerns about the legitimacy of your claim to the Blackwood properties. We have evidence suggesting Sarah Blackwood was not mentally competent when making her final decisions. Additionally, several legitimate heirs are prepared to contest the will. We strongly advise you to consider our standing offer before this becomes unnecessarily unpleasant. Jake added it to the growing file of threats and challenges. Over the past week, construction equipment had mysteriously broken down. Supply deliveries had been delayed. Workers had been approached with offers to spy on the project. But this was different. This was an attack on Sarah herself. They're getting desperate, Herbert Mills observed when Jake showed him the letter that afternoon. The banker's office had become a kind of war room, maps and documents covering every surface. Trying to paint Sarah as incompetent would invalidate everything she's done, not just the inheritance. But why now? Martha Chen asked from her seat by the window. She'd taken to keeping watch on the street, noting who came and went from Drake's temporary offices across the way. They must know. We have proof of Sarah's competence. Those water management plans alone show how sharp she was right to the end. Because of this, Jake spread out the morning paper. The headline read, Blackwood Water Trust announces free access program. Below was a photo of Jake signing agreements with local ranchers, guaranteeing them fair water rights in perpetuity. We're moving too fast, making it harder for them to buy people out. A knock at the door made them all tense, but it was only Thomas Chen, clutching a set of architectural drawings. You need to see this, he said, spreading them on Mills's desk. Drake's people filed permits for development all around our boundaries. Industrial-scale stuff, water bottling plants, mining operations. They're trying to box us in. Jake studied the plans, seeing the strategy behind them. They want to force us to sell by making the land unusable for what we've planned. He traced the proposed developments. Put heavy industry here. Pollute the groundwater. Build here. Block the natural water flow. Classic siege tactics. Some. Folks are already selling, Martha reported grimly. The Hendersons signed over their grazing rights this morning. Drake's offering double market value. Jake pulled out Sarah's journal, flipping to an entry he'd read dozens of times. She saw this coming. Listen, money's like water, flows to the lowest point unless guided. But people, they'll rise to higher ground if you show them the way. He turned to Thomas. How fast can we start the education programs? The temporary classroom's ready now. We've got water engineers willing to teach, ranchers signed up to learn. Do it. Today, show people what we're building isn't just about profit. Jake pulled out the original plans. And move up the community center construction. Give people a place to gather, to feel part of something bigger. Mills nodded approvingly. Sarah would have done the same. She always said the best defense was giving people something worth fighting for. Another knock, and this time it was Jimmy. Gates, the old tracker. His expression was grave. "Riders up in the North Valley," he reported. "Looking for old claim markers, taking soil samples. They're prospecting." Jake remembered Sarah's warnings about the mineral rights, about how they were tied to the water rights in ways that could destroy everything if mishandled. "Get me those surveys Sarah commissioned," he told Mills. "And Martha, we need a town. Meeting tonight. It's time everyone understood exactly what we're protecting." As the others rushed to their tasks, Jake stood at the window, watching Drake's men cross the street below. They moved with the confidence of people used to getting their way, of wealthy men who believed everything had a price. But Sarah had taught him differently. Some things weren't for sale. Some legacies had to be protected, not just for profit, but for principle. The letter in his pocket carried threats, but Sarah's journal held something stronger: purpose. "They think this is about money," he murmured, touching the silver pendant that still hung around his neck. "Time to show them what it's really about." Outside, the first students were arriving for the water management class, their faces eager and determined. Jake smiled, seeing Sarah's vision taking shape despite the gathering storm. The real fight was just beginning, but for the first time, he wasn't fighting alone. The fire started just before midnight, turning the newly constructed community center into a blazing beacon against the dark sky. Jake stood in the rain-soaked aftermath, watching smoke rise from the ruins of 3 months' work. The smell of wet ash and charred timber filled the air as firefighters doused the last smoldering beams. "It wasn't an accident," Jimmy Gates said, quietly crouching to examine marks in the mud. "Too many points of origin. Professional job, meant to look natural." Sheriff Cooper nodded grimly. "Found these scattered around back." He held up several empty gas cans. "No prints, of course. No witnesses either. Convenient how the security lights went out just before it started." Jake said nothing. His hand, instinctively finding Sarah's journal in his coat pocket. He'd taken to carrying it everywhere, drawing strength from her words. Now, as he watched hope literally go up in smoke, he needed that strength more than ever. Martha Chen appeared at his elbow, offering coffee from a thermos. "Drake's lawyers filed their injunction this morning," she reported, "claiming our construction violated some obscure watershed protection law." Her voice turned bitter. "Ironic. Them burning down a building meant to teach water conservation, then claiming they're protecting the environment." Back in the cabin, Jake spread Sarah's journal on the old oak table, its pages illuminated by lamplight. He'd read it cover to cover a dozen times, but tonight he was looking for something specific, her account of facing her own darkest moment. He found it in an entry dated 40 years ago. "Lost everything today, or so they think. Lawyers seized the main ranch, the bank accounts, even father's pocket watch. They believe they've broken me, forced me to see reason. They don't understand that some things can't be taken. Knowledge, purpose, truth. These waters run deeper than any law can reach." The next entry described how she'd rebuilt from nothing, starting with the hidden cabin and a handful of trusted allies. But it was her reflection that caught Jake's attention. "The real test isn't in what they take from you, it's in what you choose to rebuild with what's left. Money burns, buildings fall, but principles, if you hold them tight enough, become foundation stones." A knock at the door interrupted his reading. It was Thomas Chen, clutching a roll of salvaged blueprints. "Most of the foundation's still good," he reported. "We could rebuild in half the time, stronger than before." Jake nodded, then noticed Thomas was holding something else, an old photograph, its edges charred. It showed Sarah as a young woman standing proud before another building's ruins. On the back, in her familiar handwriting, "First attempt at the school 1983, burned by accident. Built it twice as big next time. Found it in the wreckage," Thomas explained, like she knew we'd need to see it someday. Jake spread out the construction plans, weighing them down with the journal. "Sarah faced worse than this," he said quietly. "She didn't just survive. She found ways to make every setback work in her favor. He turned to an earlier chapter in the journal, finding Sarah's detailed notes about Drake's father's similar tactics in the 1980s. She'd anticipated this pattern, left instructions for countering it. The public sympathy from the fire could be used to fast-track permits for rebuilding. The insurance money could fund improvements they couldn't have justified before. "Get everyone together," Jake told Thomas. "Not just our workers, everyone in town. Tomorrow morning, before Drake's people can spin this their way." As Thomas hurried out, Jake returned to the journal, reading Sarah's words by lamplight. "Every attack exposes their fear. Every setback shows what they think is most important to destroy. Pay attention. They'll tell you exactly what you need to protect." The community center had been more than just a building. It was a symbol of unity, of shared purpose. By destroying it, Drake had revealed his true fear, not of Jake's legal claim to the land, but of the community's growing commitment to protecting it together. Dawn found Jake still at the table, surrounded by Sarah's writings and his own notes. The journal lay open to her final entry. "To whoever finds these words in their hour of doubt, remember that true strength isn't in never falling, but in how you rise again. These waters have flowed since before our time and will flow long after. Our job isn't to possess them, but to protect them. Stand firm, stand together. The land knows its friends." Outside, people were already gathering, drawn by word of mouth and common purpose. Jake touched the silver pendant at his neck, feeling its familiar warmth. Time to show Drake that some things couldn't be destroyed by fire. They could only be tempered by it. The town hall meeting wasn't held in the town hall. Instead, hundreds of people gathered at the burned community center site, standing among the ashes as the morning sun painted the valley in shades of promise. Jake watched them arrive. Ranchers in dusty boots, farmers with calloused hands, townspeople who'd closed their shops to be here. Even the Hendersons, who'd sold their rights to Drake, stood at the edge of the crowd, uncertainty written on their faces. Martha Chen circulated with a thick sheaf of papers, a community petition she'd started at dawn. "Every signature represents a family committed to fighting Drake," she explained. "People are angry. The fire woke them up to what we're really facing." Jake stepped onto a partially burned beam to address the crowd. In his hand, he held not just Sarah's journal, but documents proving what he was about to reveal. "Last night," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "Drake's people tried to destroy more than just a building. They tried to break our spirit, but they didn't understand what Sarah Blackwood taught me, that true strength grows from the ashes of adversity." He held up a stack of water testing reports. "While we were fighting the fire, Drake Industries filed permits to begin industrial operations in the North Valley. What they didn't know was that Sarah had spent years documenting the underground springs there, springs that feed every well in 3 counties, springs their operation would poison within a year." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jake continued, "But Sarah left us more than just proof. She left us a choice between selling out for quick profit or protecting something precious for generations to come." Thomas Chen stepped forward, unrolling new architectural plans. "We're not just rebuilding the community center," he announced. "We're building a future. Look here. Sustainable irrigation systems that could double crop yields, natural aquifer, protection that would guarantee clean water for our grandchildren, education programs to ensure our children know how to protect what we're fighting for." The crowd pressed forward to see the plans. Jake noticed the Hendersons moving closer, hope replacing their uncertainty. "Drake offers money," Jake said. "We're offering something more valuable, a promise. A promise that your water rights will be protected, that your children will have clean water to drink and fertile land to farm, that the legacy Sarah protected for 40 years will continue to serve this valley for generations." Martha held up her petition. "Who's with us?" The response was immediate. People surged forward to sign, but they offered more than just signatures. Farmers pledged equipment for rebuilding. Ranchers offered crews and horses. The local lumber mill promised materials at cost. Even the Hendersons stepped forward. "We were wrong," John Henderson said, his voice rough with emotion. "Drake's money looked good on paper, but paper don't grow crops or water cattle. We want to make it right." Jake pulled out another document, one Sarah had prepared years ago. "She knew you'd come back," he told them quietly, showing them the clause that allowed them to reclaim their rights under specific conditions. She never lost faith in her neighbors. As the crowd organized into work crews, Jake felt a familiar presence, almost as if Sarah was standing beside him, watching her vision take shape in ways even she might not have imagined. The silver pendant seemed warmer against his chest, a reminder of promises kept and renewed. Herbert Mills appeared at Jake's elbow, excitement breaking through his usual banker's reserve. "Drake's people are watching from their office," he reported. With satisfaction. "They don't understand what they're seeing. They think community is something you can buy or break. They never learned what Sarah knew, that it's something you grow, like the waters under this land, deep and lasting." By sunset, the ruins had been cleared away. New foundations were marked out, broader and stronger than before. But more than that, something else had been built this day, a renewed sense of common purpose, a shared commitment to protecting what mattered most. Jake stood at the cabin's door that evening, watching the last trucks pull away. Sarah's journal lay open on the table inside, her words eerily prescient. "The land knows its friends. The waters know their guardians. When the time comes, the people will remember what matters most, not the gold in their pockets, but the wealth beneath their feet and the legacy in their hearts." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in the valley Sarah had protected for so long, hope flowed as strong and sure as the hidden springs beneath the soil. The new Blackwood Ranch logo caught the morning light, its design combining Sarah's pendant map with symbols of water and growth. 3 months after the fire, the rebuilt community center stood as its first showcase, twice the size and 3 times as busy as originally planned. But it was what happened inside that truly honored Sarah's legacy. Jake stood at the back of a packed classroom, watching elderly rancher Bill McKinnon share 50 years of drought management experience with eager young farmers. On the walls, detailed watershed maps mixed with photographs of Sarah through the years, telling the story of one woman's determination to protect something precious. "Used to think I knew everything about water management," Bill was saying, his weathered hands tracing ancient stream patterns. "Then Miss Sarah's program showed me how much more there was to learn. Now, thanks to these new methods, my grass is greener than it's been in 20 years. Martha Chen slipped into the room, her usual energy somewhat subdued. "Drake's people are pulling out," she whispered to Jake. "Their office is empty this morning. Local hands they hired are already asking about work here instead." Jake nodded, unsurprised. The last month had seen Drake's support crumble as the Blackwood programs proved their worth. Every successful crop, every thriving herd, every restored spring stood as testament to Sarah's vision. "Did you see today's soil samples?" Thomas Chen asked, joining them with a handful of reports. "The natural filtration system is working better than we hoped. Water quality's up 30% in the test areas." Outside, the sound of construction continued as the main ranch buildings took shape. Local craftsmen had insisted on incorporating elements from Sarah's cabin, handcrafted details that spoke of permanence and care. The research center's cornerstone held a copy of her journal, sealed in copper and glass, a reminder for future generations. Jimmy Gates entered, trailing a group of wide-eyed children. The old tracker had found his calling as a teacher, sharing his knowledge of the land's hidden waters with the next generation. "These springs have stories," he was telling them, "and if you learn to listen, they'll tell you what they need." Jake touched the silver pendant, now matched by similar ones worn by the ranch's core team, symbols of their commitment to Sarah's principles. Each one opened different parts of the facility, just as Sarah's had opened the way to this future. "Miss Sarah would have loved this," Martha said softly, watching the children gather around a working model of the valley's aquifer system, seeing her dreams take shape, her knowledge being passed on. Jake pulled out Sarah's journal, turned to one of his favorite passages. "True wealth isn't in what you keep locked away, but in what you set free to grow. Water teaches us this. The tighter you grip it, the more it slips away. Let it flow naturally. Guide it wisely, and it nurtures everything it touches." The afternoon brought more progress. The first graduates of the water management program received their certificates, simple documents that represented months of combined traditional knowledge and modern techniques. Among them stood John Henderson, his eyes bright with purpose. "Drake offered us money," he said during the small ceremony. "The Blackwood program taught us how to make our own, the right way. My land's producing better than ever, and my grandchildren will drink clean water because of what we learned here." As sunset approached, Jake walked the property with Thomas, reviewing plans for the next phase. The architect had integrated Sarah's vision with emerging sustainable technologies, creating systems that would protect the water resources for generations. "Look at this," Thomas said, pointing to where the evening light caught a spring-fed stream. A month ago this was nearly dry. Now they watched a family of deer drink from the clear water, unafraid of human presence. Back in the community center, the day's last class was finishing, local teachers learning how to incorporate water conservation into their curricula. Jake recognized Sarah's influence in their enthusiasm, her belief that knowledge shared was knowledge strengthened. "We're not just building a ranch," he told Thomas, as they watched the sunset paint the valley in gold. "We're building a legacy that will outlast all of us." The evening light caught the ranch's new logo, making it seem to flow like the waters. It represented. Sarah's pendant felt warm against Jake's chest, not a burden now, but a reminder of promises kept and dreams taking root in fertile soil. The memorial plaque caught the morning sun, Sarah Blackwood's image etched in bronze, alongside words she'd written decades ago. "Water flows where it's needed most, if we have the wisdom to guide it and the heart to share it." Below, today's date marked the official opening of the Blackwood Water Conservation Ranch and Learning Center. Hundreds of people gathered in the courtyard, surrounded by the completed buildings that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape. Sarah's cabin, carefully preserved, stood as the heart of the complex. New structures radiated outward like ripples in a pond. The research center, training facilities, community spaces, and working ranch operations, all connected by flowing paths and living waters. Jake adjusted his tie, uncomfortable in formal wear, but knowing the occasion demanded it. Besides, as Martha had pointed out, Sarah had dressed up for important moments too. Her photograph in the main hall showed her in her finest, signing the original water rights agreements that had started it all. "Ready?" Herbert Mills asked, his banker's suit somehow fitting perfectly with the ranch's blend of practical and professional. "Quite a crowd out there, even got reporters from the city papers." Jake nodded, touching the silver pendant that had become his talisman. "Sarah would have hated all this attention," he said with a smile, "but she would have understood why it matters." The ceremony began with Jimmy Gates leading a group of local children in demonstrating the ranch's natural irrigation systems. Their young voices carried clearly as they explained how the waters flowed, how the land was protected, how their future was being secured. Sarah's emphasis on education lived on in their bright eyes and confident words. Thomas Chen followed with a detailed presentation of the ranch's innovative design. "We've created something unique here," he explained to the attentive audience. "A working ranch that's also a living laboratory, a training center, and a model for sustainable water management. But more than that, we've built a community hub that Miss Sarah always envisioned, The proof stood in the crowd itself. Ranchers whose lands were thriving under new management techniques, farmers whose crops were flourishing with optimized irrigation, families whose futures were more secure because of what they'd learned here. Even former Drake employees had found purpose in the Blackwood programs. Martha Chen unveiled the companion piece to Sarah's plaque, a wall of photographs showing the project's journey from ruins to renewal. The burned community center, the community's rally, the rebuilding process, all leading to today. This isn't just a memorial, she said. It's a living testament to Sarah's belief that doing right by the land means doing right by its people. When Jake's turn came to speak, he brought Sarah's journal to the podium. "A year ago," he began, "I was a wandering cowboy with empty pockets and no direction. Then I met a remarkable woman who taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the legacy you leave." He opened the journal to a marked page. Sarah wrote these words 40 years ago. "Sometimes the biggest dreams take the longest to grow. Like water wearing a waystone, persistence and patience can reshape the world." She was right. What we're celebrating today isn't just buildings and programs. It's the fruition of a dream that took decades to mature. The ceremony concluded with the opening of the gates to the public areas. Families streamed in, exploring the educational displays, watching demonstrations of water conservation techniques, sharing stories of how the Blackwood programs had changed their lives. By sunset, Jake stood on the cabin's porch, where he'd once helped a dying woman unlock her door. The valley spread before him, transformed yet timeless. The hidden springs still flowed, but now their waters nourished more than just the land. They fed a community's hopes and dreams. Herbert Mills joined him, carrying a leather folder. "Final paperwork from Drake's lawyers," he said with satisfaction. "They're formally withdrawing all claims and challenges. Seems they've finally accepted that some things aren't for sale." Jake smiled, thinking of Sarah's words about persistence. Wearing a waystone. The pendant at his neck caught the last rays of sun, its encoded map now familiar as his own heartbeat. In the distance, children's laughter mixed with the sound of flowing water, music that would have made Sarah smile. The memorial plaque gleamed in the evening light, but the real monument to Sarah Blackwood's vision was all around them. In the thriving land, the strengthened community, and the protected waters that would flow clean and clear for generations to come. The wedding ring glinted in the morning light as Jake turned it over in his hands, its simple gold band somehow bringing everything full circle. A year and a half after finding Sarah collapsed near the creek, he found himself back at the cabin's old oak table, but this time he wasn't alone. Rachel Henderson sat across from him, her father's former position as Drake's strongest supporter, now a distant memory. She'd been the first to volunteer when the ranch needed a veterinarian, bringing not just her medical skills, but a deep understanding of the land that matched Jake's own growing connection to the valley. "Grandfather's ring," she said softly, recognizing the band Jake held. "Dad told me Sarah returned it to him last month, said she'd been keeping it safe all these years." John Henderson had found the ring in a small box on his doorstep, accompanied by a note in Sarah's handwriting. "Some things need to come home when the time is right." The ring had been his father's, lost decades ago when the family nearly lost their ranch during hard times. Sarah had bought it from the pawn shop, but waited until now to return it. "Your father said he couldn't think of a better way to heal old wounds than to see it used to join our families," Jake said, watching Rachel's eyes fill with tears of understanding. Their courtship had grown as naturally as the waters flowing. Through the valley, quiet conversations during long rides, checking the springs, shared moments teaching children about the land's hidden treasures, gradual recognition that their dedication to Sarah's legacy had grown into something deeper. "She knew, didn't she?" Rachel asked, touching Sarah's journal where it lay open on the table. Even then, she was planning for more than just protecting the water rights. Jake nodded, remembering Sarah's words about letting things flow naturally, about guiding rather than forcing. The journal entry before them read, "The land knows what it needs. People do too, if you give them time to find their way. The sweetest springs are often the ones that take the longest to reach the surface." Martha. Jen found them there, her entrance carefully timed, no doubt. "Time to get ready," she announced with poorly concealed excitement. "Everyone's gathering at the old stone circle." The ceremony would be small, just family and close friends, held in the sacred space Sarah had shown Jake on that first journey to the cabin. But the celebration afterward would include the whole community, ranchers, farmers, townspeople, all those who'd become part of the extended Blackwood family. As Jake dressed in the cabin's back room, he found himself talking to Sarah's photograph. "You'd laugh at me now, all cleaned up in this suit. But you'd understand why it matters, how some moments need to be marked properly." The silver pendant still hung around his neck, now paired with a matching one Rachel wore. They'd become symbols of commitment not just to each other, but to the legacy they both served. The ranch had grown beyond anyone's expectations, but its heart remained true to Sarah's vision, a place where water, wisdom, and community flowed together. Herbert Mills would walk Rachel down the aisle, her own father having insisted the banker, who'd helped save so many local ranches, deserved the honor. Jimmy Gates had composed a blessing that combined old tracker wisdom with Sarah's teachings about the land. Thomas Chen had designed an arch, incorporating water features that seemed to play music when the wind blew just right. "Got something for you," John Henderson said, entering with a package wrapped in faded quilting. "Found it in our attic. Sarah left it there years ago, with instructions to open it on this day." Inside, Jake found a silver frame holding a photograph. He'd never seen Sarah as a young woman standing beside her grandfather at a wedding. The note attached read, "Marriage, like water rights, is about protecting something precious, not by holding too tight, but by letting it flow true. Your happiness would have been worth everything I protected." As Rachel appeared in the doorway, radiant in a simple dress that echoed Sarah's in the old photograph. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes shining with the same mix of strength and gentleness that had first drawn Jake to her. He touched the pendant, feeling its familiar warmth. The hidden springs still flowed beneath their feet, the land still whispered its ancient wisdom, and Sarah's legacy lived on in ways she must have hoped for, but never demanded. "Ready," Jake replied, taking Rachel's hand. Together, they stepped out into the morning sun, where the gathered community waited to celebrate not just their union, but the continuing flow of life, love, and purpose in the valley Sarah had entrusted to their care. The bronze statue caught the last light of day, Sarah Blackwood's figure standing eternal watch over the valley she'd protected for so long. 5 years to the day since Jake had found her near the creek, the statue's dedication marked more than just a memorial. It celebrated a vision fully realized. Jake stood back from the gathered crowd, Rachel's hand warm in his, as their 3-year-old daughter Sarah played near the statue's base. The child's laughter mixed with the sound of flowing water from the memorial fountain, its design incorporating the mysterious markings from the silver pendant that Jake still wore. "Look there," Rachel whispered, nodding toward the valley below. A line of riders approached, young ranchers graduating from the Blackwood program, their horses picking careful paths along trails Sarah had once walked alone. Behind them, green fields stretched to the horizon, proof that her methods worked not just for conservation, but for prosperity. Herbert Mills joined them, moving slower now, but his eyes still sharp. Final reports came in from the state water. "Board," he said with satisfaction. "Our watershed's health rating is the highest in the region. Sarah's models are being adopted all across the West." The Blackwood Water Trust now advised similar projects in 3 states, sharing Sarah's wisdom while protecting her principles. The original ranch remained the heart of it all, a living laboratory where tradition and innovation flowed together as naturally as the springs beneath their feet. "Mama, look!" little Sarah called out, pointing to where Jimmy Gates was teaching a group of children to read the land's signs. The old tracker had trained a new generation in his art, ensuring that knowledge of the hidden waters would never be lost again. Martha Chen appeared with her grandchildren, all wearing junior ranger badges from the educational program she'd developed. "Drake's son was here yesterday," she reported. "Not to make trouble, he wanted to learn. Says his father finally told him the whole story, admitted Sarah was right all along." Jake nodded, unsurprised. The land had a way of teaching truth to those willing to learn. The valley's success had transformed not just the community, but the very way people thought about water rights and resource management throughout the region. Thomas Chen's latest designs were spread out in the research center, plans for expanding the educational facilities while preserving the land's delicate balance. Each new addition honored Sarah's original vision: work with nature, not against it. Guide, don't force. Protect, don't possess. The dedication ceremony began as the sun touched the western hills. John Henderson, his own grandson on his knee, shared stories of Sarah's quiet influence through the years, mysterious help during hard times, anonymous gifts that saved farms and futures, wisdom that flowed like the hidden springs she'd protected. When Jake's turn came to speak, he brought out Sarah's journal one last time. Its pages had been digitized, its wisdom shared with researchers and students worldwide, but the original remained a touchstone of truth and purpose. 5 years ago, he began, a remarkable woman trusted a wandering cowboy with more than just her fortune. She trusted him with a vision of how things could be, should be, when people remember that true wealth flows not from what we take, but from what we protect and share. He looked out over the gathered faces, weathered ranchers, eager students, young families, all part of the extended community Sarah's legacy had created. This statue isn't really for Sarah. She'd probably laugh at such a fuss. It's for us, and for those who will come after. A reminder that one person's dedication can change not just a valley, but the very way we think about our responsibility to the land and to each other. Little Sarah climbed onto her father's shoulders, reaching up to touch the statue's outstretched a hand. The gesture seemed to connect past and future, the child named for a woman whose wisdom had transformed a community. The setting sun painted the valley in shades of gold and purple, just as it had that first evening when Jake helped Sarah home. The hidden springs still flowed, the ancient stones still stood guard, but now they were surrounded by new life, new purpose, new understanding. Rachel squeezed Jake's hand as their daughter began reciting the water conservation pledge she'd learned. In school, words taken from Sarah's journal, now taught to every child in the valley. The bronze statue caught the last light, Sarah's face turned toward the future she'd fought so hard to protect. In the deepening dusk, with family and community gathered close, Jake touched the silver pendant that had started it all. Sarah's voice seemed to whisper on the evening breeze. The waters know their friends, the land knows its guardians, and love, like the springs we protect, flows strongest when it flows free.